Did you know that this game's been around for like 12 years? Crazy to think about, right? Some players are probably younger than the game itself. The battle cast has only just been getting bigger and more popular in the recent years. As more updates rolls out, the game's content is getting bigger. Adding new things to the game keeps the game fun and fresh, and that's what kept the game going for so long. But with improvements with older units, and new abilities means you need more playgrounds. The game needs more challenge, harder and harder stages, trickier enemies and new enemy types, and with new stages, the cycle repeats. Now you need even more new units to counter those stages. More upgrades are given to older units again, so that they are able to catch up with the new meta. Some of these units maybe are locked to like late game like Luza, or new forms locked behind a difficult event stages like Esoteric Uriel. But some new powerful units are now also obtainable early game like Courier Cat, a powerful rusher unit that was added during the beginning of the Behemoth updates that can be obtained relatively early into the game. Units like Courier poses a threat to a lot of the stages becoming unbalanced. Certain stages that were once really hard becomes really easy. Certain roadblocks for late game players becomes doable for early game players. Although this may help in pacing of the progression of the game with the increasing contents, this also means that a lot of the older content starts to become more invalidated. Yeah, this can be good at some parts of the game or some stages are just annoying to get through, but some truly interesting stages that could have been a fun experience could just turn into a boring filler content instead. This is what is often referred to as power creep, and a huge amount of stages in the game has been impacted by this. Many stages and stories of Legend has been probably hit the most with power creep. I couldn't even begin to talk about how much the Legend stages were impacted. Deadly Advent stages, these are like special boss event stages, are also often impacted by power creeps. These stages that are supposed to feel super special and unique, but over time they would just fall off in grace and become very simple and brain dead to do. With the introduction of new units or upgrades that makes these stages so much more easier. Like I mentioned before, it is good in a way that players are now able to clear these stages more easily, but this also means that the original experience are lost in time. Yeah, it might be possible to give yourself some kind of like restrictions to replicate those like old strategies, but really nobody would ever do that unless they're forced to. And so restricting yourself sometimes just comes off as stupid to a lot of players, understandably so. Still, this just shows how no stages are safe from power creeps. Even ones that are meant to be super special and is a cut above the rest still gets heavily affected by them. But among all of the stages in the game, one stage from 7 years ago in particular have been shown to stood the test of time. I mean, it's not alone in that, but I think it is very special in that regards. The flow of time has eroded the stage's difficulty, absolutely, but the essence of the stage itself has mainly stayed intact. This is the stage that's widely considered by the community as the best stage in the game. This is Heavenly Tower Floor 30. Heavenly Tower itself is an event that appears whenever Ponos feels like it. It's usually like around 3 to 5 months or so. It contains 50 stages or floors, and each floor has their own unique level designs. Yeah, take that, Gauntlets. But on its first release, Heavenly Tower didn't always have 50 floors. The peak of Heavenly Tower used to be at the 30th floor. Actually, the peak of Heavenly Tower is still the 30th floor, if you know what I mean. But anyways, the general gist of Heavenly Tower is that you climb these floors and you try to go as far as possible, collecting a variety of great rewards along the way. Starts off easy and it gets generally harder and harder. Heavenly Tower is extremely unique as majority of these stages almost feels like its own special stage, especially starting from floor 18 or 19. The level structure becomes more and more cohesive. It felt like every floor is its own proper special challenges. That being said, as interesting as the floors can be, most of these stages are still relatively simple. As long as you have the basic expected units, a general basic strategy, and proper level on your units, then things are generally fine. That's how it is for most Battle Cat stages in general anyways. With good level, basic strategy, a bit of luck, and a good lineup, and being able to actually tap boxes properly, you're pretty much usually good to go. But Floor 30 was very different. Floor 30 was pretty much the first ever stage in the game that has ever challenged that idea to an extreme degree. Even if you do understand the basic strategy of the stage, you are still going to be tested on another thing. And that is execution. Let's get to what Floor 30 is. Floor 30 contains 4 basic enemies, 3 being the peons and 1 being the boss, Hermit Cat. Let's start with Hermit Cat, a traitless boss that's also very obviously meant to reference Korin from Dragon Ball. It's not gonna give you a senzu bean though, but you're definitely gonna be needing it after we fight him. He boasts a gigantic 4 million HP with 12 knockback counts, so you'd be sure to be fighting him for a while. He has a 3-hit multi-hit attack and is able to do wave attacks on each of their multi-hit. This is his one and only ability. He has no immunities, no debuffs, not even LD or Omni Strike, none of that. Hermit has 255 range, which is not the highest range in the world, but the level 5 wave attack would still be able to reach a lot of your far-reaching units. Every hit will deal 22,222 damage, so all 3 strikes would deal 66,666 damage. And if including the wave attack, it would deal a total of 133,332 damage per every cycle. So basically tanking him is pretty much out of the question. Plus, due to how his wave attack works, it's nearly impossible to meat shield him like a normal enemy. Spawning a bunch of meat shield would just get shredded in one wave attack. Rushing him is also out of the question as he boasts a bulky health of 4 million HP. Plus, there wasn't really much units that can debuff traitless enemies either back in the day, and especially not one with wave immunity. Despite not really having that much abilities, he's already a very imposing enemy, and even just trying to stall him is already difficult. How exactly are you supposed to stop this monstrosity of an enemy? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The answer is to lure and use fast meat shield and have consistent timing. So you see, for a unit to produce a wave attack, the unit needs to actually land those initial hits in order for the waves to actually occur. This means that if your meat shield dies on his first hit and no other cats enter his range on the second and third hit, then it won't produce any waves on the second and third hit. And so you have this gap that you can put a meat shield in. But even then, due to how the wave travels, there's really no good way to slip a meat shield under his nose every single time. Manic Mohawk, being the fastest meat shield in the game at that point, doesn't have enough speed to be able to stall him between every attack cycle, except if you lure Hermit close to your base. By fighting near your own base, not only is it easier to time your meat shield in general, it also means the wave attack would pass your cat base where your units spawn, and so you'll be able to spawn your unit before the wave attack even expires. If you time your meat shields right, you'll be able to stall him permanently. You just need to time it pretty consistently, but as long as you're near the base, the timing isn't actually that strict. So, stalling Hermit has been solved. Now, how about damaging him? Well, although wave immune meat shields have not existed at this point, wave immune range attackers have. There are several Ubers with wave immunity at this point, but getting one is already pretty rare, and at this point in time, there's only one choice for non-Uber players to actually use, that is Miyamoku Musashi. Well, his name at the time was actually Miyagi Musashi. It's a bit weird, but Ponos actually retconned his name, while in JP his name stays the same. At first I thought it's because of the sake of the new legendary Musashi Miyamoto, but that's clearly a different name, so what gives? Honestly, pretty messed up. My boy Musashi got done dirty. But anyways, Musashi is a 400 range wave immune unit with a somewhat long attack rate and not really the best of damage output. It's actually pretty not great, all things considered, especially compared to a lot of Ubers, but it's enough to work for the stage. And so we have a way to 1. Infinitely stall Hermit, and 2. Damage him consistently. Just use Musashi. So the stage has been solved, but only if it's that simple, because we haven't even talked about the 3 other enemies in the stage. That's right, these are the actual true threats of Lore 30, the Trinity of Peons, Doge Dark, Ginger Snake, and Trolley Blogger. Doge Dark is a basic but strong peon that does a powerful damage per hit, as well as a fast movement speed and attack. It has a lot of knockback count, so dealing small damage to it will only make it rebound and linger around longer. Then there's Ginger Snake, a red peon that has a rapid attack as well as a fast movement. Ginger Snake has less damage per hit, but attacks more often, pushing whenever there's a chance. So if there's any small crack in your defenses, it'll be sure to push through. And finally is Trolley Blogger, a weak, squishy peon that has a 15% chance to knock your units back. Blogger mainly is just a very minor threat that is there to kinda give you money, but his 15% knockback can ruin your timing if it unexpectedly ruins your meat shields back. The stage starts off with only spawning a few of them one by one, but the longer you play the stage, the peon spawn starts to increase in numbers, sometimes now appearing in groups or mixing different peons altogether. And it's all in random intervals too, so you don't really know what to expect. So now, on top of having to time your meat shields, you now also have to find a way to deal with these peons. Randomize multiple peons, mind you. All the while having the constant threat of wave attacks coming from Hermit. Sure, your wave immune range attacker is able to hit these peons too, but you can't fully rely on that either. That's not gonna be enough to kill them. So then how are you supposed to deal with these peons? Just like your fast meat shield, if you bring units that are just fast enough, they too would work here. Assume that your unit would only be able to do 1 or 2 hits before dying and make the most out of it. Bring units that would fit such scenarios. The most prime example would be Maglev Cat, a unit with fast speed, instant attack, and high damage per hit. It is extremely easy to time its attack, as it's very accurate, and not to mention it does a lot of damage in just 1 hit. Any peons that would get hit by it would just instantly get crippled hard. Plus, if you manage to finish an enemy off with it, you will get rewarded with a double hash. Other basic examples of units that works here are Manic Island, being an anti-red unit with fast attack startup as well as decent speed. He also has the ability to deal more damage against red enemies, which means that it would deal more damage against Ginger Snake and even tank more hits on them. Swimmer Cat is also another good one. It has fast attack speed and good damage per hit, but slower attack startup. At a high enough level threshold, Swimmer can survive a singular Hermit hit. Because of this, Swimmer can land 2 hits to Hermit Cat. Remember how the peon waves gets harder over time in this stage? This means that you want to kill Hermit as soon as possible, and so any little damage to Hermit counts, and especially with how spammable Swimmer is, having Swimmer damage Hermit over and over can be very helpful in just trying to end the stage as soon as possible. You can also use Swimmer for the peons, but you need to actually protect Swimmer with a meat shield to get a hit off. And because of that, bringing a secondary meat shield like Manic Eraser or Rice Ball can be a valid choice. Both of these are fairly fast moving and fairly tanky meat shield, which can help in stalling both Hermit and the peons itself. Stalling the peons can often also help to just buy time for your wave immune attacker to land their hit. It's just generally safe to have a second meat shield in the stage, really. And also Rice Ball, even though it doesn't have as much health as Manic Eraser, has the immunity to knockback, which means that it can help against Trolley Blogger's random knockback. These are usually your main core units for floor 30 back when the stage first appeared. If you play well, you can just rely on these cats and that would be enough. But multiple peons at once would be troublesome, as most of these units are just single target. Trying to defeat more than just 2 enemies at once with single targets unit with constant threat of wave being applied would be very tough. And so in that case, having another area attacker might be what you want. Kung Fu Cat is one such example. The funny thing about Kung Fu Cat is that the best form that people use for this stage is specifically first form Kung Fu. A huge part of it is because the first form Kung Fu has better attack animation. That's basically it. The true form Dancer Cat has better damage output, but since it has a longer startup animation, it is a little bit harder to use, so people would usually just go with the first form. Weightlifter is also another valid area attacker for the stage. Despite her slow movement speed, her attack startup is still pretty fast, and her ability to do massive damage against black means that it can one-shot or heavily cripple Doge Darks. It is usually a pretty risky play because of how slow she is, and so you usually need to lure the Doge Dark really close to your base to get a hit off, but if you can use her properly, she can be a very valid choice. Awakened Bahamut is also amongst one of the more popular choices in the stage. Similar to Swimmer, you can get Bahamut to do 2 hits at once, totaling for a round of 180,000 damage to Hermit, and if one of those hits knock Hermit back, you can get an extra 3rd hit. You do need to set this up a little bit, but if you're successful with this, that's 270,000 damage to Hermit very quickly dealt. Alternatively, you can also use him for a panic button for difficult peon waves too. You don't want the peons to hit the base too much, and Bahamut is great to just kill off peons instantly in 1 hit. But using Bahamut for peons means you're losing damage on Hermit Cat. Losing damage to Hermit Cat means you're going to have to fight him longer, forcing you to fight even more dangerous peons. These sort of like decision making on whether you want to use Bahamut on peons or save it for Hermit are just one of the few sudden decision making you gotta make on the stage. Most of the decisions you gotta make on the stage are very much unplanned. Even just something as simple as, oh, how should you deal with a single peon? Have many answers. If a Ginger Snake is coming, which orders of units are you gonna use? Are you gonna use Manic Island first to get the first hit and then finish out off with Maglev? Or maybe the timing isn't right and it's better to just use Maglev first and then use Manic Island. Or maybe it's better to use Swimmer Cat first. But then if you use Swimmer Cat and it's now off cooldown, you can't use it for Hermit Cat as much. And what about Doge Dark? It is tankier than Ginger Snake, so 2 hits might not cut it. Would it be a good idea to let Doge get close to the base so that Weightlifter can get a clean hit? But that would be risking base damage and potentially even risking your wave immune attacker to get hit. What if instead you stalled the Doge Dark so that your main wave immune attacker would be able to land the hit? That way it would be crippled enough for your other attackers to finish it off. But then what if multiple peon comes? What if there's 2 Doge Darks and one of them didn't get hit? What if both Ginger Snake and Doge Dark comes in? What if 3 peons comes in? Are you gonna stall for time for your wave immune attackers to attack again? Are you trying to group up and use Kung Fu? Are you gonna use Bahamut on it? Or maybe it's possible to just pick them off one by one. There's quite a lot to think about, and that's just the basics of the stage too. Killing the peons aren't the only thing you should be thinking about. You also need to worry about keeping your ranged wave immune attacker alive, about the positioning of your wave immune attacker. If you're too close to the base, you're risking your base getting tripped off. But being close to the base also means that it's easier to time your units, and it also means your wave immune attacker is much more safe. If you're farther from the base, that means your base isn't going to be having any risk of getting tripped off, but it's harder to time your units and therefore your wave immune attacker might not survive that long. It would be pretty risky for your wave immune attacker, and if your wave immune attacker dies, dealing with the peons would be very hard, but you're still going to have to get used to it because every time you knock Hermit back, your units would generally also push forward. So then what do you have to do if your unit is too far? Well, there are actually ways to bring them back closer to the base. I mean, if you let your wave immune attacker gets hit by the peons, then it would naturally get knocked back anyways, right? But that's usually not the ideal solution, especially with how hard Hermit and Doge Dark deals damage. But what about Ginger Snake? Ginger Snake doesn't have that big of a damage per hit, and so if you let Ginger Snake hit your wave immune attacker, then perhaps it wouldn't get that much damaged. And what about Trolley Blogger? Trolley Bloggers has a 15% chance to knock back your units, right? If your wave immune attacker isn't knockback immune, then you can hope for RNG for your Trolley Blogger to knock your units back. But since it's RNG, it can still be pretty risky and much of a hassle too. So sometimes it would just maybe be better to just let Ginger Snake hit your unit instead. But well, maybe you don't want to just let your units get knocked back by something and it's just try and risking fighting far away from base. Whatever it is, the decision is up to you. Okay, so here's another situation that you're gonna have to think of. So if your main attacker is a bit far from the base, what if it's now off of cooldown? Should you save it up just in case your main attacker dies? Or should you just spawn it anyways for extra damage and being able to deal with the peons easier? Plus, the faster you spawn it, the faster you can begin the cooldown for the next cycle, right? But are you going to risk 2 attackers dying right as you just set one off of cooldown? It would be difficult to try to survive without a wave immune attacker, so are you gonna be greedy or will you play safe? The decision is once again up to you. Oh yeah, there's also cat cannon choices to think about. Are you gonna go with basic cannon or breaker blast cannon to knock the enemies off of the base? Or perhaps slow beam to help in dealing with the peons easier without needing to meat shield? Plus, slow beam covers the whole stage and comes out instantly, so it's easy to time. Maybe you could also use a high enough freeze cannon so you have setups to deal with damage to Hermit more. But freeze cannon has shorter duration than slow beam and has a limited range and delay, which means that it could miss its targets. So which one will you choose? In the end, the decision is once again up to you. My go-to is slow beam, by the way, just saying. Oh, and also, what about cat combos? What cat combos are you gonna use? Oh, by the way, speaking of cat combo, my last video is about one of the best combos in the game, so you should check it out if you're interested. But anyways, damage up cat combo is extremely helpful in this stage. Helps in killing both the peons and Hermit Cat faster. But how much of your lineup are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of cat combo? More unit variety in your lineup means you have more plans to deal with the peons, but sacrifice too much slot in your lineup for combos and you would have less room for mistakes. It would be quite tense and risky for most players. Unless you're Nurse Wufa. This man's kind of a psycho, I'm telling you. Okay, let me tell you a bit of a story. On my first ever clear on floor 30, I decided to use the combo Contest of Champs. This combo gives you an extra 10% damage and contains Rice Ball and Kung Fu. These 2 units I'm meant to bring anyways, so I'm basically only sacrificing 2 slots. Nurse Wufa, however, decides to go in with the Cool Japan combo. This combo gives 15% damage, but out of its 4 slots, Rice Ball is the only normal unit choice here, so he sacrificed 3 slots for the sake of that extra damage. His main lineup is incredibly stress-inducing, where the only area attacker he has in his team is Bahamut and Musashi. For the peons, he purely rely on Manic Island, Swimmer, and Maglev, all single target units, meaning he has to play with intense care and precision, especially against multiple peons. He has very little room for mistake, all for the sake of the 15% damage advantage. It's such a psychotic lineup, and his run is also immensely stressful to watch. I mean, even the description in this video straight out says, do not attempt this. It's there for a reason. But if anything, I think this just shows how there's no exact right or wrong way to beat the stage. Perhaps having less units to work with allows you to focus better than giving better results. But not bringing any combos could also be valid. This was what another YouTuber Yohane did on his first clear. Instead of combos, he opted in bringing dragons instead for extra peon clearer, playing it safer by having more units for the peons. This too is also a valid way to approach the stage. It's safer, but you'll have to deal with Hermit for a longer amount of time. Ultimately, once again, the choice is up to you. But this is what makes floor 30 so good. There are so many ways to beat the stage and all of them are valid. Maybe some choices are more obviously better than the others, but there's so much good choices with their own pros and cons. From planning a lineup to the main execution, everything must be done with care, and yet there's no true rights or wrongs. Plus, with how the peon spawns are randomized, you usually have to react accordingly and adapt every time. It makes the stage infinitely replayable. On repeat attempts with the same lineup, you could have wildly different experience depending on how the peon spawns. And you can always change your lineup to shake things up. Rarely any stages in the game has a replayability like this. And man, it's just such a fun stage to play. Every little move counts, and with how much split-second decisions you gotta do, everything just feels so satisfying to pull off. Having a plan in your head that works feels so immensely satisfying. Successfully chaining Bahamut feels really satisfying. Quickly cleaning up a difficult peon wave feels really satisfying. And if your wave immune attacker dies and you survive long enough for your wave immune attacker to go off of cooldown, it feels really gratifying. Not to mention the stake just gets higher and higher the longer you play due to the increasing peon waves. So you'd just be on the edge of your seat the entire time. So by the time you beat the stage, you get an insane amount of satisfaction, especially on your first ever clear.
Yes! Yes! It's done! We did it! Let's go! Let's go! Fuck you, bitch! Yeah!
In my 8+ years of playing this game, I can't believe I've been playing this game for 8+ years, but clearing 430 for the first time was the absolute peak of the game for me. Some stages have come close, but this is still the peak. I mean, even if you don't win, even if you lose the stage, it still feels like you lose because of your own mistakes, you know? You could have prevented the reason why you lost. You could have played with your supports better. You could have timed your units better. Maybe you shouldn't have been more greedy. Maybe you should have been more greedy. And even if you make a mistake, you can still come back from your mistake. And even if you do get unlucky with RNG, a lot of the times it's like controlled luck. Even if you get a bad luck, there are still usually ways to deal with them as long as you play well enough. As long as you play it right. It is absolutely wild that this is one of the first stages that Battlecast has ever done like this too. Even though there are some stages with some sort of like strategizing before this really was like the first ever stage that takes execution 10 steps further. Well, I mean, still, the stage is 7 years old. 7 years is a lot. Some kids playing this probably aren't even 7 years old. After a whole 7 years, there's no way that floor 30 remains unscathed. And yeah, that would be correct. As the game keeps on adding new updates and adding more and more units and more improvements, the stage ultimately gets easier with wider choices of units and units that just works really well on the stage. One big change was the introduction of the wave blocker ability. Units with this ability will nullify any waves that comes in contact with it, protecting the unit itself and any units behind it. Theoretically, this would mean units with this ability can just protect your units from Hermit's wave entirely, making the stage complete free win, but that's not quite the case. When this ability was first released, the first units to get it were Cat Machine and Octopus Cat, but both of these are melee units. They won't just block Hermit's wave forever. In practice, they would walk inside Hermit Cat's range and would melt from his gigantic damage output. They can still block a few waves before dying, but once they're in Hermit's range, they'll just disappear from this world. Doesn't mean they're useless though. Since Octopus has decent cooldown, you can use it as a temporary wave blocker to support other units, allowing units that might have trouble landing hits like Can-Can or Weightlifter to land hits more accurately, or allowing units with decent time between attacks like Manic Island to land more hits than usual. Also, speaking of Weightlifter, Weightlifter also gets a true form Pizza Cat, now has better range allowing it to reach peons easier, as well as being able to hit more enemies at once. Similarly, we got stuff like Swimmer's true form Fishman Cat and Maglev's true form Bullet Train, both getting general stat improvement and speed up for easier execution in general and better damage output. There's also new units like Glass Cat and Vendor Cat. Glass Cat is a one-time use unit that can slow traitless enemy for a whole 8 seconds. Very useful to deal with the peons without Hermit's wave interrupting. The true form Crystal Cat has extended slow duration and a knockback effect, which makes it even easier for you to deal with the peon waves. Vendor Cat is also another anti-traitless unit that can knock Hermit back consistently, giving you extra space if you really need it. Both Vendor and Crystal's knockback can be pretty dangerous to use, as again, you usually don't want to fight Hermit too far from the base, but if you do need the space, then they're there. There's also the introduction of Zamboni and its true form Green Shell Cat, a wave immune tanker that would simply stay in place after attacking. Although you can't really tank Hermit with this, you can set set him up to act like a secondary cat base, allowing you to lure peons and have shell to take the hit instead of your base. And these are just some for non-Uber units. For Ubers, it's mainly the addition of new wave immune Ubers, or improvement of existing wave immune Ubers in general. But there is one Uber that really stood out as like the floor 30 killer on its release, and that is Eva 00. Eva 00 also has the wave blocker ability, but unlike Cat Machine and Octopus Cat, this one just straight up outranges Hermit, so it wouldn't just run in and die. So as long as Eva 00 is alive, Hermit Cat would not be able to produce any waves. And without the threat of waves, then theoretically this should just make the stage instant easy win. Except that I have seen people losing at least a run or two with Eva 00, because sometimes people are just bringing lineups that can't protect Eva well. Maybe not enough meat shields or not enough range attackers. And with Eva dead, the players would just not know what to do and die. So yeah, even with the supposed true counter floor 30 killer Uber, people still need to get a proper lineup going on, or else you just die an embarrassing death. By the way, all of these are like older power creeps. I haven't even talked about like the modern side of power creep. Another big batch of changes comes from Special Cat's talents update at 10.0. Now, Rice Ball can be given much more health with talents, making him rival the health of Manic Eraser, so he can tank the peons better. Heavy Assault Cat also now has the talent for dealing massive damage against black enemies, as well as general stat improvement, which is already very powerful, as Heavy Assault Cat is already a fast moving, fast attacking unit with rebound, and with proper talents he's now able to heavily cripple or straight up kill Doge Darts very cleanly, and even survive a Hermit Cat wave with health talent so that he can attack twice. Dancer also gets a talent, but we'll save this one up for later. There's also the addition of Slime Cat, which is able to heavily cripple a huge group of peons with a relatively easy execution too, with just a singular nuke wave. There's also everybody's favorite, Courier Cat. With his ability to deal massive damage against red enemies, he can instantly snipe ginger snakes off, but he could potentially also miss the snakes due to his blind spot. I really could just go on and on about this. There's a lot of changes in the game that can be good options for floor 30, but you might have noticed that I've skipped a couple of few pretty important stuff. So let's get to what probably are the simplest, yet most effective addition to Battle Cats that hits floor 30 the hardest. And that is simply the addition of more and more wave immune units. Compared to back then, wave immune units now are so much more common. And if you can have multiple wave immune attackers at once in the field, it means that they are likely to deal with the peons themselves without needing that much support from other units. More wave immune attackers also means you can cycle them. If one dies, you can replace it with another. Even just some of the older wave immune Ubers like Keiji, Akira, or Anubis works really well here. And if you bring all three of them, you can either cycle them if one dies, or you can have them all out and support each other, and having all three out means they're more likely to deal with the peons themselves. Plus, all of these are pretty much already better than Musashi to an extent, especially on the damage output department. For non-Uber wave immunes, we're also getting quite a lot of choices too. Rugby was one of the earliest spammable wave immune attackers that isn't entirely terrible. Like, we had Akuma Lion or Fate Archered Cat, but these guys are just straight up really bad. But hey, even with all of these really not great units, if you bring all three of them, you can still win by sheer numbers. I mean, it's not gonna be a super easy win maybe, unless you're boosting them, but it's winnable. And that's just with these pretty bad units. You got better choices later on, like Rugby's true form Gridiron, now with better stats. Other pretty decent wave immune units also gets introduced, like Tea-Master or Mushroom Cat. Dancer, that I've mentioned earlier, also gets a wave immune talent, and this makes him extremely good here, especially with his stats talent. You also got other really good choices like Brainwash King Dragon and Hitman Cat. Hitman Cat especially, as he has the ability to deal massive damage against Hermit Cat, making him able to shred Hermit Cat extremely quickly. But just having good wave immune damagers alone aren't really enough to destroy floor 30 by itself. Having multiple wave immune attackers at once means they are likely to push harder, and it's much harder to manage multiple wave immune attackers at once. And so chances are you're gonna push hard from the base, and they're going to die, as it is harder to stall Hermit Cat farther away from the base, right? Technically, it is also possible to use Manic Lion to stall Hermit Cat, as Manic Lion is extremely fast and can tank 2 hits. But if you're fighting too far from the base, then even Manic Lion might be a little bit hard to time, and therefore we also have another option, which is Little Lion Cat. Little Lion Lion is a wave immune Lion variant, so you can time him much easier to stall Hermit. Then there's Dread Pirate Catly, one of the earliest spammable wave immunes we got after the introduction of his wave immune talent. And although it doesn't really have any good ability or any good stats, since it's cheap and spammable, it can be used as a ranged meat shield for an extra layer of defense, allowing your ranged attackers to survive longer even if far away from the base. Thaumaturge is also another good support unit that gets a wave immune talent. With guaranteed chance to perma-weaken any traits, you can cut Hermit's damage by half as long as you have one out. Weakening Hermit is huge, as it not only allows your ranged units to survive longer, it also lets tankier stallers like Manic Eraser or Rice Ball or even Lion to tank more hits from the wave. But it also allows rushers like Box or Fishman or Bahamut to land more hits in one go. It is very powerful. There's also Sweet Bros Cat, a wave immune super rare with the chance to slow traitless, which also helps in stalling better. Speaking of slowing traitless enemies, remember that we still have Glass and Vendor. I did mention that the knockback can be bad unless you need to, and this is one of those situations where it definitely would help. If you're planning to go all out on full wave immune team anyways, then there's not much reason in trying to fight too close to the base, so just keep knocking Hermit back, that would be fine, right? Another choice you can have is Boulder Cat. As with Research combo, Boulder Cat is also able to stall Hermit permanently. By the way, remember that Research combo video that I mentioned earlier? Yeah, I also talked about that here, so go watch that one after this video if you're interested. But yeah, anyways, speaking of like wave immune meat shield, there are also more proper wave immune meat shields in the game too. One of the first one that actually got this was a collab unit from Gudetama. It is basically a wave immune Mohawk Cat, but it's expensive to spam. Plus, it's also a collab unit. But later, Gold Cat's true form and Little Mohawk's talents also gains wave immunity. And these are literally just basic cat copies. Maybe Little Mohawk's a little bit different, but it's essentially the same. So if you have a bunch of wave immune range attackers in your team, combined together with proper wave immune support and stallers, you can just have a big stack of self-sustaining range attacker that deals with both Hermit and the peons without really needing any timings or support or whatsoever. So yeah, you can destroy floor 30 with the modern power creep meta. Just have a bunch of wave immune attackers and a bunch of wave immune supports. But if you think about it, I don't know how to put this exactly, but the units that really destroys floor 30 is like, this is not the exact word, but it's like unrealistic, uncommon. Yeah, I don't really have a good word for this, but let me explain so that you may understand what I'm thinking about. Most of the units that absolutely destroys floor 30 are usually combinations of late game units, or units that just requires really big investment, or are very rare Ubers, or requires multiple specific Ubers. But floor 30 is kind of like a mid-game stage. It's not really a stage that's meant to be played at a late game scenario. Given the difficulty of floor 21 to 29, or even the floors afterwards from 31 to 40, floor 30 isn't really meant to be a stage played at late game. It's kind of like in a similar difficulty as like Manic stages, or Deadly Infant stages like Hanya or No Plan A. But then obtaining units like Hitman, or Brainwash King Dragon, or Gridiron, it's like these are not units that you get so easily. You get Gridiron from beating 1-1's Revenge stage, which not only itself is already a challenge, but is also locked behind the Deadly Advent Wawa, which is also another really difficult stage. Hitman is from the stage Empress Excavation 4, which means that you need to beat Empress Excavation 1 to 3, and you also need to beat the stages with Deonil. Plus, you need to farm some really rare Behemoth stones to true form it at the first place. And then there's Brainwash King Dragon. The true form comes from beating Malevolent Dragon stage, which is a stage that is balanced around late game players. But not only that, to get the base unit itself, the Brainwash Lizard, you need to roll the gacha on specific seasonal gacha banner and actually got the one specific super rare. Then there's Gold Cat True Form, which not only is already a rare unit to obtain, but the true form also requires Gold Fruit and 3 Aku Fruits, both being resources that are extremely difficult to get early game. Little Mohawk's wave immunity can be bought with a measly 75 NP, and all those NPs are scarce. 75 isn't that big, so it's not too crazy, but getting the true form itself does require you to beat a stage that has the restriction of specials and rares, and you need both proper LD units and meat shields that are only in special and rares to beat it, which usually early mid-game players might not really have. And so this begs the question, if you're using a late game unit to deal with a mid game stage, is it even really power creep, or are you just over prepared? I mean, it is also possible that maybe you just got lucky with multiple wave immune ubers, or extremely rare broken wave immune ubers. But having enough wave immune ubers to single-handedly destroy the stage, or just having those extremely rare broken ubers, are just, well, it's rare. It's unlikely scenarios. You gotta be really lucky to obtain either loads of multiple wave immune ubers or powerful fest ubers, especially in mid-game. Again, not an impossible scenario, but you do gotta be lucky for that. And hell, even with these ubers, if you don't really have proper wave immune supports, or proper supports in general, then you're still gonna have to learn the stage like usual. You're still gonna have to learn the core of the stage like everybody else. Meanwhile, stuff that are easier to get doesn't break the stage as hard. Stuff like true forming Pizza Cat, or getting Octopus or Fishman Cat. A lot of mid-game players would have this, but they don't destroy the stage necessarily. You could also invest NP on Dancer Cat to get his wave immunity, but in mid-game you usually don't have that much NP, and you might not really be able to invest on his stat talents that much. And in that case, Dancer would just be a somewhat good pick here, rather than completely destroying the stage. And even if you do invest him all the way, you're still gonna have to learn the stage. Even something like Slime, Tea Master, and Mushroom, even if they're somewhat unlikely to get on your first clear of floor 30, they don't completely single-handedly destroy the stage either. But well, perhaps it's not that terribly rare for people to be over-prepared nowadays for floor 30, because the Heavenly Tower event is only up whenever Ponos feels like it. Sometimes it could take 3 months or even up to 6 months for it to be scheduled, and if you miss your chance, then you're gonna have to wait more months to prepare, and a lot can happen in 3 to 6 months. You could already go from mid-game to late game, you could already be beating some difficult stages, you could be rolling some extremely rare ubers, who knows? A lot can happen in 3 to 6 months. Speaking of which, Ponos, please give us Labyrinth again. It's been legit a whole year since we got Labyrinth scheduled in EN version. Please give it back. But anyways, yeah, for the most part, you do have many choices to make things simpler, but unless you're either extremely lucky or extremely over-prepared, then really by the core, you're still playing by Hermit Cat's rule. And with that, the really fun design of everything that this stage has to offer is still there for most players. And that's why this stage is just absolutely one of a kind. Well, okay, maybe not that one of a kind. I mean, there are several stages that are in the same vein with it. The later apex of Heavenly Tower, floor 40, was also a crazy stage and release. The boss Eulala requires intense meat shielding to stall properly. Nearly frame-perfect stalling is required to make sure he doesn't push, all while trying to deal with peons very carefully, and also setting up strats to burst down Eulala with Big Muhammad Chain. Unfortunately, the additions of anti-traitless units over the years hits floor 40 very hard, and due to being a ladder part of the tower, the expected progression that you have when getting to this stage is also a little bit further. Certain units like Tourist, Glass, and Super Cat destroys this stage much harder than floor 30. And although Super Cat might be harder to get, owning it and Vendor really makes the stage extremely easy. Well, the twin level of floor 40 in the other tower, Infernal Tower, is more challenging. Infernal Tower, by the way, is basically Heavenly Tower. They also have 50 floors and the stages are pretty identical in a lot of ways, but generally are tweaked to be harder. So Infernal Tower's floor 40 features a relic typing Eulala, and although very late game anti-relics does destroy the stage, those anti-relics are like really late game, and usually it is somewhat unlikely to get them on your first ever encounter. This one's actually pretty tough if you don't resort to like broken ubers or like specific cheese strats with like Sniper Punk, but if you have certain specific units like Doron and Edie, it is actually a pretty damn difficult challenge. It is not as tense as floor 30, but it is worth mentioning. Speaking of Infernal Tower, the floor 30 of Infernal Tower I think is also worth mentioning. The stage is pretty similar in nature with Heavenly Towers, with Hermit Cat now being a relic enemy, and the stage featuring Little Bonbons and Aku Snakes. But again, since the expected progression of the stage is much further, chances are by the time you get to the stage, you already own a pretty good amount of wave immune units to make the stage much easier. It is quite different than Heavenly Tower's floor 30, because dealing with the weak peons are generally not really the issue. The main issue is to just deal with the Little Bonbons. But after dealing with 2 Little Bonbons, usually you have enough damage to kill Hermit. Plus, Hermit's relic targeting allows it for some other anti-relics like Tea Master to kill Hermit even faster. It's still a pretty decent stage, but I think it's a far cry from the original floor 30 and how exciting it is. Outside of the tower, there's also stages stages that are quite similar with floor 30 or floor 40. Funnily enough, 3 out of the 4 stages that I'm thinking about right now are from the Evangelion collab. Refusal Type, We'll Meet Again, and Grow Up Shinji. Gee, Evangelion, how come you get 3 cool boss stages? That's crazy. The bosses featured in all 3 stages can't really be bullied by using debuff. The boss in Refusal Type and We'll Meet Again, which is Zeruel and Awaken Eva 13 respectively, are Eva Angel. These does not have any debuff counter, even though they're a specific trait. The boss in Grow Up Shinji, Eva 13, is actually a traitless boss but is immune to debuffs. Plus they boast a huge amount of health and not that much knockback count, so usually the only way to keep these enemies at bay is using the Sniper Cat power-up. You can't even really use cannons to deal with these guys. Pretty much all of these stages are like an intense boss battle against an unstoppable foe with a couple of peons as support. Yeah, don't that sound familiar? They're really fun though. Extremely intense stages. They're definitely my personal highlight whenever Evangelion collab is coming back in. I don't really care about like new Ubers or whatever. I want to fight Eva 13 again. Outside of the Evangelion collab stages, the 4th stages that I'm thinking about is actually Revival of Origin, which is the final stage of Uncanny Legends. But frankly, I'm not really qualified to talk about this because I haven't even played the stage. I swear I'll do it on stream soon, I know. But this is also one of those like, you know, one boss with supporting peon type of stages. But like, these kind of stages aren't really the only type of stages that are memorable, you know? Sometimes instead of one boss, there's 2 bosses. Like, floor 44 of Infernal Tower comes to mind. It's actually one of my personal favorites in Infernal Tower. Not the top, but one of my favorites. Having to deal with waves of difficult Aku peons with 2 long-range bosses slowly creeping towards your base, and having to deal with tricky enemies like Malevolent Cat too. It's pretty fun. Plus, you really need to manage your money well in this stage, especially if you're not resorting to use Rich Cat power-up. I like this stage quite a bit, and of course, I'm saving one of the best one for the last. In Heavenly Tower, there is one more stage that is probably also considered as maybe like top 3 or top 5 stages in the game, and that is Heavenly Tower's floor 47. The stage consists of 2 main bosses, Comet Puffsley and Craze Maneko. Craze Maneko being a mid-range multi-hitter boss who creates wave on her 3rd hit, as well as Comet Puffsley, which is an extremely bouncy and tanky long-range support with big piercing range, and is very sensitive to damage, as every little damage you deal to it, it would get knocked back and rebound to do another attack. The stage has quite a lot of execution needed depending on how you decide to tackle the stage. You can either play offensively and set up a way to defeat Puffsley as fast as possible, or you can play the long game and outlast the enemy peon waves. The stage can be pretty difficult and is very satisfying to pull off. However, compared to floor 30, most of the things that happens in the stage are very predictable. The enemy spawn timer are very much fixed for the most part, so if you have a proper plan ahead of time, you are very much able to beat the stage with an extremely high consistency, especially if you have some sort of setup to kill Puffsley extremely fast. Despite that though, I still do think that this stage very much deserves the pedestal on being one of the best stages in the game. It is actually very tricky and very fun to play, and especially in your first play, it can be very satisfying to pull off whatever plans you're having. Unfortunately though, the Infernal Towers version of floor 47, for some reason they remove a lot of part on what makes the stage difficult and replaces it with like easier enemies. I don't know how, but the stage actually ends up being easier. Oh, Puffsy's dead. Oh, okay, that's very stupid. Why is there like no enemies that spawns? I'm still kind of baffled that Ponos fumbled Infernal 447 so badly. This was such a huge disappointment. But yeah, anyways, there are a lot of stages that I find cool. I would be talking non-stop if I just keep on going and going, so I'm gonna drop some more honorable mentions that I personally like. Floor 39 of Infernal Tower I think is a pretty good one. There's a fun setup to rush the stage down that I really like. Then there's the Archaeology 501 stages, the ones that features Kuro Croc. Some of the only behemoth stages that doesn't just get destroyed by like courier spam, to an extent. Kuro Croc is a very fun enemy, and the 15 cat limits in the stage really forces you to be more careful with what units you spawn. I really wish Ponos uses Kuro Croc more in the future. He's such a good enemy. And who could forget No Plan A, one of the first Deadly Advent stages featuring Cruel Angel Clionel. Although this stage has now gotten much easier with the introduction of courier and many other units, one of the most consistent modern strategies strategy still follows the same idea from 8 years ago. Actually, in hindsight, this stage also have really stood the test of times, all things considered. That's pretty cool, don't you think? There's definitely lots of other stages I've yet to mention. I can't name them all. This video's already gone way past its course. If I keep on talking, it's gonna be another like 3-hour video, okay? But yeah, I do hope that Ponos makes these kind of stages more. I don't think they need like consistent banger over and over, because I feel like that would get pretty tiring really quickly. But I do still wish that they would make a lot of more interesting stages down the line, you know? So these stages are very engaging and fun. It's not just about the lineup building, it's not just about having certain Ubers, but also having like the right amount of execution. It's great, I like it a lot. But even with all of these like current really good stages, I still feel like none of these stages give you the same amount of serotonin you have from beating floor 30 legitimately the first time in your life. I'm sure a part of me is also praising this because of nostalgia. I mean, back when floor 30 was first released, in my opinion, that was like the golden age of Battle Cats for me. That's when I enjoyed Battle Cats the most. And beating floor 30 for the first time, pretty much for the moment, was like what cemented me and what like convinced me that I really do like this game a lot. So hey, if you haven't beaten floor 30 before, I hope you're looking forward to it. Don't try to force yourself to do any kind of restriction that you don't want to do. I mean, if you want to, that's fine, but I think restricting yourself out of like peer pressure would just feel more frustrating than anything. If you don't mind though, then yeah, I think restricting yourself can be fine, especially if you're interested in a good challenge like no other. When Heavenly Tower comes back, I'd highly recommend maybe at least doing it without Ubers if you want restriction, or just limit yourself to 1 or 2 wave immune Ubers. I hope that you too can feel the same adrenaline rush when I first beat floor 30 for the first time, because this stage is really an experience like no other in the game. Thank you, Hermit Cat. I'm gonna need some Sensubin after this battle. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on this stage, or perhaps any other notable stage that I haven't mentioned, then please leave your comments and thoughts below. Do you think there are other stages maybe better than floor 30, or in a similar vein than floor 30? What's your experience with floor 30 like? And what do you think about the stages in general? But yeah, aside from that, thank you for watching. Catch you another time. Bye bye.